Anyway, how's the bees?
Mine are doing good. I pulled the honey off and put the pollen on, and seem to be they're already building up pretty good. So
Have
you get all your honey off?
Yeah, I got my honey off. And I've got mite treatments on. I guess that's probably the next most important thing to do right now is get those mites under control.
I caught it right after I pulled my honey. We had those few cool days, and so I put mite treatment on, and I seemed to got that taken care of. And I thought I'd go ahead and get feeding them and get them build up.
And that's kind of where I'm at right now as well. So pulled my honey off, got it all extracted, and I've got Apigard. I went with Apigard this fall. I would have preferred to do Formic. I actually like Formic, but it's just too hot.
I did Formic, but like I said, I just kind of waited. We had that one Friday, Saturday, Sunday month that was cool.
Yeah.
And so I was able to get it on, and it was down to 70. I just lucked out on it, really.
Yeah, if you catch it just right, it's okay. If you can kind of get past that
3 days.
4 days, 3 4 days, then temperatures don't matter quite as much with Formic. It can get hotter and not blast them out of the hive.
Yeah, I don't think they really like it anyway, but
No, they don't.
it is what it is.
And I did Apigard, and I even did half dose of Apigard just because it was hot when I put it in. And my bees are still bearding on the outside. They don't like it.
That's like, I think this coming week, Thursday after tomorrow, Thursday, supposed to cool way down for a little bit.
Yeah. So I actually have Joey Caputo coming Thursday. He asked if he could come inspect my hives as part of the National Honeybee Survey.
Oh.
So he came in the spring in June, and but they have to come back for a second time in this survey. So he's coming this week, and I think after he gets through pulling the samples he needs, I think I'm going to put the full dose of Apigard on.
Well, it should be way cool on Friday.
Yeah, should be cool enough for it so it doesn't completely blast them out of the hive.
He was, it must have been the same time you had him come there in June. He sent that card over, and I think we talked about it.
Yeah.
He and wanted inspection, and so anyway, he's a good guy.
Yeah, they have to have at least 8 hives to sample from in the apiary. So that's kind of hard for most people around here to do, but I usually have about 8, or at the house I have more than that, but they're kind of small nukes, and so unless they're a really good nuke, I don't want him sampling them. But
yeah,
but it usually isn't a problem. So I can either he'll sample the ones here at the house this time again, because he wanted to sample the same hives.
Oh, so he will do your nuke. You got hives, or you got to use some of them out of the nuke.
Yeah, so he will, but that's okay. They'll be okay. They're starting to look pretty good. I'm still feeding my nooks, though. There's just nothing out there for them right now.
Well, that's
Very
what
little.
I decided. That field right by where mine are, they let it go to bloom, but that was about the time I was pulling my honey, and then I had those cool days coming, and I wanted to. It worked out because they cut the hay that weekend anyway. So, but yeah, there's not a lot out there, and that's why I decided I'm just gonna put some feed on. If they collect their own stuff, that's fine. Otherwise, they can build up with what's in there.
Yeah, mine are pretty full. So, since I run mediums, the top medium's completely full of honey for me. And even
Yeah.
second medium is usually 90% honey. And there's usually a few frames in the bottom box that have some honey in it. So, but I don't.
So,
Go ahead.
well, I was kind of concerned about that. My upper, I just run the two deeps. My upper boxes, I had some. I started with these packages, and I had some frames of honey that were full. They never did use them this spring, and so I just left them in there all summer. But my top's getting quite full. They're filling it full. They've been bringing some honey in. I just weren't worrying about. I guess they've got enough space. As long as there's space in the bottom, they got place to raise their winter brood and stuff.
Right. I think that's kind of the trick is we want to make sure they're heavy enough for winter, but we don't want to shut them down too soon because we want them raising that winter brood. And
Right.
treatments tend to interrupt the queen laying for a few days. As soon as you throw, whether it's Formic or Apagard or whatever it is, unless it's Apavar, that doesn't seem to interrupt things too much. But the organic ones, Apavar or Apagard and Formic, seem to interrupt that queen laying for a few days. Which
I usually wait till right before it gets cold, the end of October, 1st November, and use some vaporized oxalic acid in there. I don't know if that's necessary. It should be in good shape. I just do it because I don't want to have a problem.
I like to do that as well, but I want to get my bees healthy. I want the bees that are raising the winter bees healthy.
Yeah. I usually treat right as soon as I can after getting the honey off, and then do it again just before it really gets cold.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I've done too. I feel like I'm a little bit behind. I feel like I'm about 2 weeks behind everything where I usually am. Because I usually have my honey pulled about 15th to the 20th of August, and I didn't get it pulled till the end of August this time.
Did you do pretty good?
Yeah, no, not really.
Not compared to other years?
Not compared to other years. I ended up with, because I harvested some at the end of June. I pulled a little bit because I didn't have any honey at all to sell. And so I pulled a little bit. I pulled like 400 pounds right there at the end of June.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you pulled quite a bit.
And this time, what was left, I had 800 pounds. So I had 1,200 pounds total, which isn't great for me. I think an average year for me would be more in the 1,500 pound range. Maybe.
You were fairly close for what it was this year, though.
Yeah, for as hot and dry as it was, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great either.
Yeah.
So I would have liked another 400 pounds of honey, but another 10, 12, 15 boxes would have been nice, but.
How long did it take you to extract it all?
It took me, the 800 pounds took me a day. I actually just took the day off work
Oh,
and
well,
spent,
I'll be able to get it all done and clean all up
yeah.
and dog.
Well, I had some family things coming and I'm just like, I got to get this done and get it out of my hair. And so I just took the day and extracted honey all day.
You got a workout then.
It wasn't bad. It wasn't
Really?
bad. My extractor holds 24 frames, so
Oh,
I can, and I like the extractor I have because I've got it programmed so that I can just put the frames in and hit go.
oh,
It'll start out slow and spin slow for as long as I want, and I usually do it like 7 or 8 minutes on about half speed, and then I'll ramp it up about 10% and ramp it up another 20%, and it ramps up by itself. So
oh, it's probably big enough that it's pretty. If you get a little out of balance, you got enough frames in there that it equalizes out pretty good. Probably.
no, it's still rocks and rocks.
It's still
Not, yeah.
Oh, I thought maybe a big enough had enough in there that it would equalize out.
No, I still have to kind of be careful about how I load it and watch whether I'm putting, a really full frame on one side and a really empty frame opposite.
Oh, I thought maybe you'd got around that with as big as it is and as many as you had.
Well, I had hoped that would do that, but it doesn't. It'll still walk and rock and shake, and if it gets too bad, I just turn it off, and then I'll
Flip them over.
yeah, I'll rearrange frames a little bit. And then once it kind of gets most of the bulk of the honey out and kind of starts to ramp up to those higher speeds, it's usually pretty good. I don't have to sit there and hold it from but it's big enough. It'll throw you around.
Oh, how bad. You don't have a hook down to the floor or anything?
No, I actually put it on a big board and put casters on the board. So it really just shakes the whole thing, but because it's on casters, it just kind of shakes back and forth, but it has a tendency to kind of walk a little bit. And I'm always, when it's out of balance, I'm always pushing it back to where I want it. If I get it in balance though, man, that thing just goes. You can hands off and just let it go, and it doesn't hardly move. If it's out of balance though, if I've got a frame that's I've noticed if I've got a frame that's got a little bit of honey, but it's really got quite a bit of pollen in it for whatever reason, that frame stays heavy the whole time. And you wouldn't think that pollen would throw it out of balance that much, but it really does.
Mine's just a small one, but I got it hooked to a sheet of plywood, and it helps a bunch.
Yeah, that's kind of, mine's just a big sheet of it's melamine. It's particle board with melamine on top of it, but but I threw casters underneath it so that I could push it around because I don't have a place to leave it. I have to move things around in my shop all the time. So
it's big enough that it takes a lot of space up too, though.
Yeah, it does. And so I'm constantly pushing the thing out of my way, and I just leave it with the casters on it when I run it. And it's like I say, if I can get it balanced, then man, it hardly even moves.
Does the casters have brakes on them, or they're just regular?
They're just regular casters. I've wondered if I put ones with brakes on them, if it would help, but I'm not sure it would make it worse.
Doesn't sound like it does that bad. I mean, it moves around a little, but it's
not terrible. It walks a little bit, but I think it relieves all the stress between the tank and where the legs connect to the tank.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it relieves that stress on the metal, on stainless steel. It's not really going to break, but I think
But you get them out of balance, you worry about that stuff.
Yeah. But I think because it's on casters and it throws everything and the casters just roll with it.
So do you just use a regular electric capping knife?
I actually use a capping plane. Have you seen those?
No, I don't think so.
Here, let me. Oops.
Have this the one with the rollers?
Yeah, it looks like a roll. No, not the
have
roller, not the middle, not the top middle one.
No, but the one at the bottom. I have seen a thing on YouTube on those.
The one with the cord on it.
Right.
Yeah, so it's heated, and it heats up the bar that's goes across the front of it, and then right underneath the bar, it's got a copper plate that's looks kind of like a knife, and you just kind of drag that just like you would a knife, like a knife as you cut off the cappings. And
How
it's,
wide is it?
pardon?
How wide is it?
It's the exact same width as a medium frame.
Oh, really? Oh, it's bigger than it looks in that picture. That you got a
Yeah.
knife right beside it. That's misleading. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little misleading. It's as wide as a medium frame. And so pretty much one pass across a medium frame will uncap the whole thing.
And if you're got a divot down in them, you just go back in with a fork or something and pick it out?
I've actually kind of learned that I can go back with the capping plane and use the corner of it just a little bit
Oh, okay.
and get down where I want. I wish I had a video. I'm gonna have to make one.
I didn't mean to get you sidetracked, but it.
No, that was kind of where I was gonna go. Was you got to get your honey off and get it extracted. So if you haven't done that, it's time to get that done. Just for Tracy and Rachel's benefit. There's several ways to get your cappings off, right? The one in the upper left is a capping fork. Some people like them. To me, they leave a lot of little pieces of wax, but it works. And a lot of people will use the capping knife, and then if they miss something with the knife, they'll come back with the capping fork and scrape or kind of pick out the cappings off the. Most everybody will uncap into some sort of tub or tote, and then let the honey drain through the double screen that's in the bottom right. Mine's a little different. This is pretty much my setup. So the picture on the left, there's my capping tank. So I'll uncap into that, and all my cappings will fall into the tank, and then I put the frame into the extractor. See if this will play. Yeah, there's the extractor running, and you can see, Kirk, that it's not moving.
Yeah.
And then as it comes out of the extractor, most people will run it through a double screen. Not everybody. I mean, just kind of preference. I like the capping plane that I use because notice there's not a lot of little flecks of wax coming out of that. There's some wax, but there's not tons. And the capping plane doesn't leave a lot of little pieces of wax, whereas I find the knife and especially the capping fork leaves lots of little flecks of wax that the screen will filter out, but it just plugs the screen up really quickly.
So I use a fork, but it's the one that's kind of tilted up on the end. And I go underneath there and I move it across and it collects it on top of the fork. Then I drag it off. I've got a board on the side there. So it catches 90%, 95% of the cappings on top of it. And then I just rub it off. And
Right.
so I don't get a lot of it into the wax.
And if you use a knife, this one's a heated one, and they've built the comb out far enough, you could do what I'm doing and you can cut the comb right just even with the wood and just run the knife right down the wood. And I'm cutting the comb back, but it evens it all up, and I've left, I've got most of the cappings off without leaving a lot of little pieces of wax. That was always my bottleneck, was that double screen coming out of the capping tank or out of the extractor. That's always been my bottleneck, is right there. And I found that when I went to the capping plane that I had less wax coming through and not plugging up the screen as quickly. They still plug up, but
Yeah, but you're a lot of honey through there.
yeah, I'm running, I don't know, what's 800 pounds? How many gallons is that? Yeah, I'm running 60 gallons through that. So I have 3 or 4 of those double screens.
Oh,
And one plugs up, then I switch to a second one. Then I can kind of work on that first one that's plugged up and scrape it out and get most of the wax cappings onto where I can use it again. And usually, like, I think I only used 3 I think I have 4. I only used 3 of them this time with swapping back and forth. You just have to watch it so you don't overflow the screen or overflow the bucket. And I've done both.
I've never done that.
Oh, you've never done that, Blaine? I believe that.
No, I never have.
I'll get uncap, I'll load the extractor up and get going and get it started. And then I'll go back and uncap, because I can pretty well keep up with the extractor. By the time its batch is done in the extractor, I can pretty well have another 24 frames ready to go. And sometimes I'll just get going along and forget about watching that screen and what's coming out of the extractor. And at first it starts out really slow, but as soon as the bulk of that honey starts to come out, man, it comes out really quick and fills the screen, and it'll fill the bucket. And yeah. If you haven't spilled honey on the floor yet, you haven't done it long enough. So that's kind of what I do. For somebody with only a single hive or a couple of hives, about your only method is to just crush and strain, unless you can get your hands on, a little 2-frame or 4-frame extractor that you can, even a hand crank. The hand cranks aren't that bad. It's surprising how well they crank. I mean, you can crank it a few times and then let it spin. You don't have to crank it the entire 10 minutes or however long it takes. You can kind of crank it and let it spin for a second, and then crank it some more. And they're not terrible. My arm would be dead after doing as much as I do. But Blaine, how many hives do you run? Usually, roughly? Oh, he might.
I have 8 hives. They're in my backyard.
And then so when you extract, I assume you just have a little extractor that you use.
I have a 24 frame extractor too. It was 12 deeps or 24 mediums, and I run all deeps.
Oh, okay.
So it holds 12. I got it used up in Park City 8 or 10 years ago. Got a really good deal on it. And it walks all over the garage too. It's
I think that walking extractor problem is, if they could ever figure that out to keep some of these smaller extractors from walking all over the place.
yeah. And it's made by Maxant.
But yours is a Maxent.
Yeah.
Mine's a Hilco. I had a 18 frame Man Lake one, and it was okay. It wasn't bad. And I bought it used, but the things I didn't like about it, Hilco is kind of fixed on their models. One of them is the automatic program. It's not very user friendly, but once you kind of get it set, all you have to do is hit the go button and it'll ramp up speed by itself, which I really like. And the other thing I like about the one I have is the floor of the extractor is tilted towards the honey gate. And so
Oh, that's good.
you can just let when you're done, you can just leave your bucket underneath the honey gate. And as long as you've got enough room in the bucket, you can leave the honey gate open and let it sit for an hour or 2 hours or whatever. And pretty much most of the honey will come out. You're left with a little bit right there at the honey gate, but not very much, which is really nice. That was one thing I didn't like about the Maxent. Yeah, I was trying to tilt the thing and prop it up and keep it from falling over, and it was annoying to me. So I sold that one and bought this Hilco. I quite like it.
For straining, I have been using those double screen devices that you show in your slide there.
Yeah.
But 6 or 8 years ago, I saw some screens that have a plastic side with different sizes of mesh for the bottom, and they're designed to fit in a 5-gallon bucket.
Yeah,
I saw these at Cal Ranch they sell them for sifting gravel for gold painting. And I thought that looked pretty good. So I got that. I've got about 5 different meshes. Yes, and I just stack them on top of each other. It starts going through a 1/2-inch mesh, then 1/4 inch, then 1/8 inch, and eventually gets really fine. And that's worked out really well for me.
Do you happen to know what the bottom micron mesh is?
It's about the same as the bottom screen on those double screen devices you have there.
Yeah, and I can't remember if those are 200 or 400 micron.
Yeah,
which I find
that's as fine as I strain it. Then I'll let it sit for a couple of days, and most of the finer stuff
will come right to the
rises
top.
to the top.
Okay, you've let it set for a couple of days and it rises to the top. What do you do to get it off the top?
I just drain it out of the bottom of the bucket, and when I get to where that floating stuff is at the top, I take that out and feed it to the bees.
Okay. Here's a trick I learned, and I didn't think this would really work, but it actually works quite well. So let your bucket sit and let the tiny wax particles and the foam or whatever, it floats to the top and kind of leaves a little layer on the top, depending on how well, it filtered out the first time. But If you take a piece of saran wrap of
Oh, I've heard of that. I've never
plastic,
tried that.
yeah, take a piece of plastic wrap and just lay it right on top of the, before you do anything. So as soon as you open that bucket, take a piece of saran wrap, lay it right on top of it. You don't have to, all I do is just barely touch it so that the saran wrap touches that debris that's come to the top.
Yeah.
And just, you don't have to push, you don't have to push it down in, just let it kind of sit there on top. And then if you quickly pull it back, and you have to be kind of quick with it because it grabs a little bit of honey, but with it as you do that. So I've gotten, so I can pull that off and pull it right out and drop it in the garbage can. And I probably only lose maybe a tablespoon of honey doing that.
Yeah.
And it'll clean,
I've heard of that, but I've never tried it.
it'll clean the top of that bucket right off. And it gets every bit of it.
Yeah.
Everything that's touched the saran wrap, it'll pull right off. And I find that way easy to do. So all that, the little fine wax that floats to the top after the bucket's settled for a day or two, I find that's the easiest way to pull that off.
I'll do that next year.
Yeah. It works quite well. Somebody told me about it and I thought, oh, that's not going to really, no, it really does work. I was surprised how well it worked.
Now, where I learned about that was people putting honey in the fair. They put saran wrap on it, and it takes the last little bit of stuff that's going to get them a yellow ribbon. Take that off, you get the blue ribbon.
Yeah. I guess before we kind of go back to fall bees, anybody have any questions on extracting before we kind of go back?
Well, I have a pretty good deal with extracting. I do extracting for the August active of my 4-H kids, so I put child labor to work on it.
You have child labor. You can
Let the kids each take home a pint, so they're happy.
You can voluntarily enlist them, and
Yeah.
if you've got your honey off and it's extracted, do you ever check the water content of your honey? Make sure it's ready?
I've never done that.
Really?
Not with the
With
tester.
with a refractometer?
Yeah. If it doesn't shake out of the frame, I'll harvest it.
And I think
That's
in
all I've
Utah,
ever done.
that's probably as good of a rule as it gets.
And that's maybe 10% of the honey is uncapped honey. So
Right. Sometimes towards the end of the season, the bees won't cap it, even though it's ready.
yeah,
And basically, the saying is, if you can't shake it, take it. So if you turn a frame sideways and give it a good shake and it's not dripping out of the frame, it's ready to go. And I think for Utah, that's probably as good a rule as any.
So,
I've tested.
I wonder if late summer, fall, they're not producing as much wax, so they don't have wax to cap it with.
I think that's probably the issue, is they just don't have the extra incoming nectar to produce the wax. And I've tested mine. I do have a refractometer, and I've tested mine. And every time I test mine, I think about 17% is about the highest I ever get.
Wow.
I never see anything in the 18% range. Everything's usually 15, 16, 17 maybe if I have quite a bit that's not capped. But I almost never see anything above that.
And 18's good.
Yeah, anything below 18 is good. So I think in Utah, that's the rule. If you can't shake it out of the frame, it's probably good. And if it's capped in Utah, in my opinion, it's golden.
Definitely.
Not an issue. I think we're so dry out here that I think you could leave honey out and it would dehydrate itself.
You get much rabbit brush honey where you are?
Rabbit brush is blooming and has been blooming for a couple of weeks now. I assume that's what they're bringing in, but I had a couple of my yards that were close to alfalfa fields that, like Kirk said, they hadn't cut yet. And I'm not sure whether they were bringing in alfalfa honey or if they were bringing in rabbit brush. I didn't stop and taste it. But I usually, like I say, I've usually got my honey off by now. And whatever they collect at this point, I let them start backfilling that brood nest and let them keep it.
Yeah.
I can't imagine rabbit brush honey being very good.
It's all right if it's aged for a couple of years. When it's fresh, it's not very good. I had a guy call me up a couple of years ago, called me up, said, I think I've got American foul brood. Would you come take a look? So I went over there and I got within 10 feet of his hives. I've got good news and bad news. Good news is you don't have American foul brood. Bad news, you got rabbit brush honey. He'd never smelled that before.
Yeah, I think I've smelled it in my hives, and it's not the pleasant. I don't know. A good healthy beehive has a certain scent to it.
And that's not it.
That's not it. Yeah. I think that's one of the scents that I actually love the most is if I crack a beehive and I get a good whiff of that hive and I can tell that hive smells like it should. They're doing what they're supposed to. You can almost just put the lid back on and walk away if they're getting healthy. And rabbit brush, I think I've had enough that I'm like, no, that doesn't smell right anymore.
I'm guessing the pollen's really good for them too.
I am seeing quite a bit of pollen coming in, and I assume it's either rabbit brush or we have, I think it's called gumweed. It's a little yellow flower. The flowers look like a little tiny daisy.
Yeah.
It's blooming all over the place out here. And I don't know if they're getting it off that or if they're getting it off the rabbit brush. Because it's just about the same color as far as the flowers are concerned. They're just about the same. The rabbit brush is a little more golden, but
yeah.
But I think that's all that's out there right now for them to feed on. There's a little bit of sunflower still blooming, but even sunflower is pretty well done. I think this is what this time of year catches people off guard, at least here in our area. They think, well, it's warm. They should still be out flying and collecting stuff. And they're out flying, but they're not collecting much.
Yeah.
And I think what happens to some beekeepers this time of year is they look at their hives, that top deep is nice and full. They've got frames on the side that are full, and they think, okay, I'm good. And then by the end of October, because there's nothing else out there for them, those bees have burned through, half that top deep.
Yeah, they're still raising brood and they need honey for that.
And I think that catches people off guard.
Yeah.
And I think that's where they get in trouble. And then, come mid-December and all of a sudden their hive's out of food and hungry and they wonder why, I left enough honey for them. Well, yes, at one point there was enough honey for winter, but they ate that before winter got here. Especially if we have a warm fall, that we stay warm clear into November. then I think that happens. And I think that catches people off guard that, yeah, there was probably enough honey in there for winter, but they ate it before winter got here. They actually consume less honey per day when it's in that 30 to 40 degree range than they do at 55 degrees. And I think that's where a lot of new beekeepers get in trouble is they start into winter, it looks good, and then by midwinter their bees are out of food and they're not sure why. So for me at this time of year, I'm watching that pretty close. And if I need to throw a gallon of syrup on them, I'm going to throw a gallon of syrup on them to make sure that I would rather them use the syrup that I'm giving them to finish raising that winter brood and not get into their honey stores, because they'll use it first. That thin liquid syrup, they'll use it first before they dig into their honey stores. So I like to give them a gallon of syrup, and I might give them two if I think they need it. If it stays warm long enough, clear into November, I'll probably give them another gallon of syrup, just so that they eat the syrup and consume it rather than consuming their honey stores. I usually put sugar boards on my hives, and some of my hives will eat through the sugar boards and some of them won't even touch them. And I think that has to do more with genetics than it does anything else. When I started with 10 Italian hives and 10 Carniolan. And since then, I've raised my own queens, and they've mated with whatever yaks have, which are going to be mostly an Italian bee, because they want those big brood nests.
Yeah.
So I think, generally speaking, I have mostly Italian genetics in my hives. But I notice I have a few hives that are really frugal with their resources during the winter. And sometimes I wonder, I get into them in the spring and wonder what they ate all winter long, because they just haven't consumed very much.
Yeah, that'd be the Carniolan
And
blood.
that'd be the Carniolan that's in them, that's really coming out. And I really kind of like that. I wish I could kind of get an Italian Carniolan cross that leaned a little more towards the Carniolan side. But with having yaks out here, they're gonna lean towards the Italian side, and that's who my queens are mating with, or probably yaks drones.
Yeah.
Which, they're going to be good bees. Yaks know what they're doing. They've done it for generations, so they're going to be good bees. But I wish I could push the genetics just a little bit closer to the Carniolan side.
So Blake, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So this is Tracy. I'm so new to this. What is a sugar board?
What's a sugar board? Let me share my screen again.
I've never used a sugar board, but when my bees are short, I use the mountain camp method.
Oh,
So,
right.
it's-
Let me find a picture here.
Is that something similar to the thin syrup?
No. So a sugar board, can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
So there's different ways to do this. The one in the top middle is a commercially sold one. Basically, they've taken sugar and they've cooked it a little bit and poured that cooked sugar into a board and let it solidify. And you get kind of a candy out of it. A lot of people will do, they'll have a shim. Notice that top middle one is got its own rim basically.
Okay.
And the bottom one right underneath it and the one on the right, they've basically made a rim and they've put a screen on the bottom of that rim. And then they'll take a lot of people will take newspaper, line the screen with newspaper, and then dump damp sugar on it. And you can do just plain dry sugar, just granulated sugar. Don't buy the organic stuff that's brown. Don't use brown sugar. Don't use powdered sugar. Don't just use white granulated sugar.
Okay.
And they'll just pack it in there, and then they'll put this on top of the top box and then put their lid on top of that. The one on the far right, you see they've left a hole there. That's
Right.
just so the bees have a way to kind of get up into it when they're ready for it. I'm going to go to the next slide and you can kind of see. So I made some for my hives, and the picture on the left is one of those rims with a 1/2-inch hardware cloth tacked to the bottom of it. And then I just flip it over. You can see in the middle picture, I've lined it with newspaper and then packed it with sugar. Now I wet my sugar with a little bit of apple cider vinegar. Some people will I used to just use water and just put enough water in with the sugar and mix it up to kind of make a wet, sandy texture. I'm not trying to dissolve the sugar. I'm just trying to make it pack a little bit, just give it a little bit of moisture. But I found that when I used water, that in the spring, that sometimes that sugar would mold. If I use apple cider vinegar, I almost never get any mold in it. So I just line that rim with newspaper, and then I'll pack 4, 5, maybe 6 pounds of sugar in it, and then I just stick it on top of the hive. And you can see in the bottom picture there's snow in the background. That particular year, I didn't stack those on my hives until almost December, middle of December or something. It was late. But if you put them on the hive too soon, like if you did that in October, the bees would go up there and grab that sugar and they would drag it out of the hive, and you'd have a line of sugar right in front of your front entrance on the ground.
Oh,
For some reason, if you put it on too soon, the bees, they seem to think it's a foreign substance and want to drag it out of the hive. If it's cold when you put it on and the bees are pretty well clustering up and not venturing out of the hive, then they leave it alone. And it's insurance. For me, it's just insurance to make sure that they've got enough food. Hopefully, I've already left plenty of food down in the boxes for them. And hopefully, my goal is that they don't even use it. But for $5 worth of, it's not even $5 worth of sugar. It's a couple of bucks worth of sugar. To me, that's cheap insurance to make sure that I've got a chance they've got something to eat on in case they've eaten everything down below. And you can see in the picture on the right, they've pretty well cleaned all that sugar out. The picture on the right is about mid-March, and they've torn out the paper, and they've eaten most of the sugar. And I came back and I'm like, okay, I need to feed them. And I had a little bit of honey left over. So I filled some Ziploc bags and with honey and laid those Ziploc bags right on top of that screen. And then I just cut a couple of slits in the Ziploc bags. And you can see the bees feed through those slits and get down to the honey just fine. So keep in mind, the one on the right is in March. This is after most of winter's through. But this particular hive, they needed extra feed, and they ate quite a bit of that sugar. And it's now to the point where I'm wanting to kind of get these bees going. So I gave them a pollen patty. So you can see the pollen patty in there as well. But they're not on the pollen patty too much. They are a little bit, but they're really after that honey that I left them. And they'll clean up the rest. They would have cleaned up the rest of that sugar. But that would have been enough to kind of get them through to into April. And that's all I was trying to do, was just get him through into April to where we started having natural stuff come in. And again, sometimes my hives, I'll have hives that'll go through one of these sugar boards, and I'll have other hives that won't even touch it. And I'll get back into the hive in April, in March, and they haven't even touched it. So
do you, oh, sorry.
This is what I call a sugar board. It's a rim, and you can just put a rim on, and you can actually just put the newspaper right on top of the frames and not use the screen that I've tacked on there. You can just put the newspaper right on top of the frames and dump your sugar right on top of the newspaper, and then put your lid on and walk away. So I think some sort of shim that's about maybe 2.5 inches tall. To me, I think that's part of the bee equipment that the bee suppliers don't sell a whole. You don't really see these too much in the bee supply stores, but I think it's one of the most useful pieces of equipment, especially in our area, for overwintering. And some people like them and some people don't use them, and that's fine. But for me, this is an easy way to make sure that my bees have enough food for winter. And if they use it, great. Then I kept them from starving to death. If they don't use it, then I can take that sugar and I can turn around, dump it in some hot water, and make syrup out of it. And
So
take it back to them anyway.
Do you feed them the pollen patties also through the winter?
We usually don't feed them a pollen patty through the winter. Pollen's their protein source, and it has too many solids, and it gives them the runs if they have too many solids in their guts during the winter. Okay. Remember, the bees don't defecate in the hive. They have to fly out to defecate. So, and around here, we have winters are so long, and we may have 4, 5, 6 weeks where the bees can't get out of the hive at all. They're not going to fly at all until we start hitting about 40 degrees, 40, 45. They're not going to come out of the hive. Well, that means they've got to hold it that whole time. And extra solids in their gut makes it hard for them to do that. So I don't mind. In fact, I like to feed them, even though we have incoming pollen right now. I don't mind feeding them a pollen patty right now. Is it necessary? Probably not. It's probably more for my feel good feeling than anything. But I like to make sure that they've got enough protein to raise that winter brood, which is what they're doing right now. They're starting to raise all that winter brood. So all the new bees that are really that emerge from here on out, those are most likely going to be your winter bees. So I want to make sure that the nurse bees that are feeding that larvae right now have all the resources they need. So I like to give them a pollen patty right now. Sometimes I only give them a half, but by the end of the month, I won't give them any more pollen. And then I'll start back up again in spring if I need to give them a pollen patty. And I usually do about mid to end of March to kind of get them jump started.
Okay. What about water? Do you water them through the winter or?
No. No. That can lead into a whole different discussion, and we can have a little, we talked about this last time, but bees need water in the winter, right? All animals do. And there's two trains of thought here. When the bees are in the cluster and they're all clustered up and they're consuming honey to keep them, that's their carbohydrate. That's what they're using so they can keep warm. Honey is, mostly sugar, but it is part water. If we kind of go by that 18% rule, it's 18% water. So as they consume honey, they're also consuming water. And they're going to bring that water into their bodies, and their bodies are they're going to use it, but they're also going to exhale warm, moist air. Exhale is probably not the right word because they don't breathe like you and I, but they're in their hive breathing, right? And they're producing warm, moist air. And that warm, moist air is going to do what? Well, it's warm, and therefore it's going to rise in the hive. And it's that warm, moist air is going to come to the top of the hive. Now, this is where you can get in fights with beekeepers about what should you do? There's two trains of thought here. You've got the cluster in the middle generating warm, moist air. And if you just leave the beehive the way it is, then that warm, moist air rises to the top, hits the underside of your lid or your inner cover, and condenses in the cold. Then it condenses on the underside of that lid and then rains back down on your bees, and wet bees are dead bees. That's way too much stress for them to have this constant drip of water back down into the cluster. So one theory is, okay, we've got to get rid of that warm, moist air. So they put a upper entrance in the hive to ventilate that warm, moist air off, which is what you see in my pictures there. You can see there's two holes in that left picture. That's how I was taught, was you've got to vent off that warm, moist air. Otherwise, it's going to condense on the underside of the lid and rain back down on the bees. And I've overwintered hives like that and done just fine. The other theory is no, we don't like that because we're letting off that heat, and the bees are losing that heat. For us, it would be like living in a 2-story house and leaving the upstairs window open. And constantly, we've got to generate heat to keep the house warm. Now, the bees don't heat the entire box, right? They only heat the cluster, not the entire box. But still, they've got to generate extra heat to keep themselves warm because they're losing all that heat out the top entrance that you just gave them, venting off that warm, moist air. So the other theory is, let's close the top entrance, but let's put insulation on the top of the hive so that warm, moist air doesn't condense on the underside of the lid. It gets pushed to the walls of the hive and condenses on the walls of the hive, which is fine because it's going to run down the sidewalls of the hive, and from there, it's okay. It doesn't hurt the bees, you know. And if the bees need to go, if they need a little bit of moisture, they can go to the outside walls and collect water off the outside walls and bring it back into the cluster. So two trains of thought there, but as far as actually giving them water during the winter, generally not needed, because they're producing enough water themselves just by consuming the honey that's in the hive.
So when do you stop giving them water for the winter? Or for the summer? Do you stop at like the end of would you stop at the end of September, for instance?
I would probably stop by the end of September. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess if it's not freezing out there, they probably aren't consuming a ton of water. I actually don't have a water mechanism for my hives. I let them gather whatever water they need from the ditches and the ponds and things that are near my hives. So I don't really even worry about water, even during the middle of the summer, because most of my hives are near irrigated fields. There's always a puddle somewhere, and there's a pond or a ditch or a swell or something somewhere nearby that there's usually water out there for them. So I don't even worry about it, honestly. But I know some beekeepers will use the Boardman feeders, the feeders that fit on the front of the hive, and you put a quart jar upside down in the feeder. And I think that's fine if that's what you want to do. I think that's fine. I don't think there's an issue with it, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, I did do that through the summer. I just gave them some water, but
Which I think it's great. I don't see any issue with that at all.
okay.
What you can't see underneath, so I've wrapped my hives with tar paper. Is that necessary? No. It's not going to insulate the hive at all. I realize that there's no insulation there. It does provide a bit of a windbreak, so the wind's not howling through the middle of my hives, but you can see I don't even insulate all the way around. I mean, I don't even wrap it all the way around. I just go up and over the top and down the side and staple it down. Underneath that tar paper are those sugar shims, though. I've added the sugar shim, and you can kind of see in the back of the truck there's one sugar shim sitting there. So I've gone in, added the sugar shim, put my lid on, and then put the tar paper over top of it. I think the tar paper gives them a little bit of a windbreak and a little bit of solar gain on warm days. That black tar paper is going to warm up just a little bit. Does it make or break the hive surviving winter? No. But I think it's an incremental help for them, and maybe just small incremental help. And sometimes I put entrance reducers on my hives, and sometimes I don't. You can see again on the left picture, the hive on the left has an entrance reducer on it, and the hive on the right doesn't. And the only reason it's that way is I ran out of entrance reducers. So the hive on the right, their entrance is wide open all year long. And that's, again, going to kind of come back to personal preference and personal theory. For several years, I just left my hive entrances wide open. I've kind of changed my thinking a little bit. So this is how I typically set my hives up for winter. I usually have 2 hives on a hive stand and I push them together, put my sugar boards on, throw some tar paper over top of them, and I usually just left the entrance wide open. I've done some research and done some studying and some experimenting over the last couple of years. And I really like the idea. I'm liking the idea. I shouldn't say I'm 100% convinced, but I've started closing off my upper entrance and adding some like a 1.5 to 2 inch rigid foam board. It's the pink insulation foam board, and adding those on top of my hive. So now they don't have an upper entrance, but they've got insulation on top. And I think I like that better for overwintering. I don't have any proof and I don't have any real statistics to say, yes, it's better, no, it's not. From what I'm seeing out of my hives coming out of winter, they just seemed, those that I did that with, they just seemed to be a little bit better. Not that the other ones weren't fine, but if you were forced me to make a decision, I think I'll be going with no upper entrance, some foam insulation on top of the hive, and a reduced entrance on the front of a hive, so a entrance reducer. I think I like that better for overwintering rather than this way. I would probably still put some tar paper over them, but I think I like it better than having an upper entrance. I'm not 100% there yet, but I'm probably 90% there. And keep in mind, I overwintered this way with an upper entrance for, I don't know, 5, 6 years, 7 years before I really started playing with some insulation on my hive. And I'm not insulating all the way around the hive. I'm just putting insulation on the top of the hive. And if you ask 10 beekeepers, you'll get 10 different answers for that one. I know Blaine dropped off. Blaine Ney was on here earlier. Looks like he dropped off. He's been keeping bees for 60 years. I'm pretty sure he does nothing with his hives, but he also doesn't, I'm not positive, but I don't think he has an upper entrance. I think he just uses, I don't think he has an upper entrance at all on his hives. I could be wrong on that, but, and he overwinters hives just fine. He's down in Cedar City.
Hey, Glade,
Yeah.
got a couple of questions.
Okay.
You ever put anything for keep mice out? Have you ever had a mouse problem?
Mice can be a problem, yes. I've really
been
had
able to put
one
the hardware
mouse.
clock. Oh, we've only had one?
Yeah, I've really only had one mouse get up into the hive, and it was dead in the sugar shim. It had crawled through the hive all the way up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because the only way it could have got in is the bottom entrance. And it had crawled all the way up to the top and got up into the sugar shim and was dead up in the sugar shim.
That surprised me. Another question for you. You know, you've talked about when you put you said you don't put your sugar boards on until December, somewhere in there.
Yeah,
What about, could you, just an idea, the insulation you're talking about, could a guy cut that so that it would fit inside that shim and just on top of the sugar? Would that work, or would it be better not to?
I think so. And that's kind of what I plan on doing this year. It's going to stick up a little bit, but it's not going to matter. I'm gonna cut it so it fits nice and snug into that shim.
Right. Just where it's, and then my tops come down over a little bit. It just depends. I can build my shim up. I've got some shims that are about 3.5 inches, and I might use them. I think you could get it all the way down in them almost, pretty
Right.
close, especially where my hive covers come down a 3/4 of an inch.
And I wish, you saw how tall my shims are. They're what, maybe 2.25 something. I'm wishing I'd built them maybe more like 3 so that I could do just that. The first,
Mine, I think, out of 1x4, so they're 3.5.
yeah, and I think I cut that down.
Okay.
That's what I'm thinking is my shim needs to be about 3 inches, and the first inch would be sugar, and then the second 2 inches would be that 2-inch foam board. My only concern is, will the bees chew on that foam board?
Yeah.
And I
A
don't,
lot of that foam is 1.5 inch because made to go on a flat 2x blade sideways. I think you can get one
you,
for a project
now,
years back.
yeah, so I think you have to decide which way you want to go. Either an upper entrance and no insulation, or close off the upper entrance and provide some sort of insulation on top. Whatever that is, I'm going to use the rigid foam board because I think that's the easiest.
Yeah.
And then I think you've got to go one of two ways. You've got to somehow deal with that warm, moist air rising to the top, hitting that underside of the inner cover. Then what? It's either going to condense and rain back down on the bees, which you don't want, or you've got to vent it off, or you've got to keep the underside of that cover warm enough, relatively speaking, right? So that it pushes that warm, moist air to the sides. The sugar, incidentally, also acts a little bit, will absorb some of that moisture. So it helps a little bit. Is it enough? How much, I don't know, but it does, it will absorb some of that moisture as well. So having that sugar shim on top of the hive can also help keep that moisture from dripping back down on the bees. And I'm wondering if that's why my system worked with an upper entrance, is that sugar was absorbing some of the moisture as well as venting it off. But I'm beginning to like an insulated top better. And I wish I had scientific proof that said, no, this works better, but I don't. So
yeah, I like that insulated cover idea. The only thing that kind of worries me about it, or maybe you can see or tell us, but are you seeing any like mold problems, or do you think it's going to cause some chalk brood issues without the ventilation?
without the ventilation, I don't know. I did it with some of my hives last year, and I've had a little bit of mold in the top, but not near what I wouldn't say it was any more than what I had before.
Yeah.
And I think the key is maybe how much of a seal are you getting around the insulation and around that top? If you put the shim on you're putting it on, at least I'm putting that sugar shim on late in the season. It's cold outside. The bees don't have time to propolize the cracks up. You're creating a draft when you open that hive. And I realize that, and I try to kind of scrape the top of the hive, around the top rim so that those shims fit down as tight as I can get them. And I guess that's where I kind of like having the tar paper over the top, because it kind of keeps some of that draft from getting in those cracks I probably created putting that sugar shim on.
Yeah, I do too.
But I think maybe, the moisture problem would stem from having a crack in there where that cold air can come in and make the warm, moist air condense in a spot where you don't really want it to condense. I don't know. I'm not a thermodynamic person. Somebody who's a lot smarter than I am is going to have to tell me, but from what I've experienced, it hasn't really been an issue. I had more mold in my hives come spring when I put sugar shims on and was just using water to moisten the sugar with. When I switched to apple cider vinegar, that mold problem almost went away. So, and I didn't see a little bit of mold in like the corner on a couple of hives that I put insulation on, but not enough that I was really even concerned about it come spring. Did I have any chalk brood? I think I had one, maybe two hives that showed a little bit of chalk brood right at the first of spring. But what I've been doing, if I find a hive coming out of spring that has chalk brood, I just make note of it. And I make sure I requeen that hive during the summer. And, I keep an eye on it, make sure it's not slowing the hive down. It usually clears up on its own. If it doesn't, then I'll dump the hive out and just get rid of the hive. I've gotten really I'm getting more and more ruthless with hives that carry a little bit of chalk brood or they carry some European foul brood. And I've found that if I just take my loss and dump it out and then take the comb and scrape all the comb and get rid of that comb, my hives seem to do better. Not put up with it. Say, okay, sorry, I don't know if that's the right answer or not.
Sounds good to me. If you got the hives to do it.
Well, and I have that luxury. I have more hives than most people do. So
Yeah.
it's easier for me to say, okay, I'm done with this hive, shake the bees out, walk away. I've got another hive in a different yard that I'll bring back in a couple of days and put it back in that spot.
Yeah.
That's why, I tell people you got to be in that 4 to 6 range to where you feel like if you've got a hive that's struggling, you can either steal resources from the other hives to augment the one that's struggling, or you can go, okay, this hive's just not worth it. It's, for whatever reason, we're done with it. Maybe it's grumpy. Maybe it's got too much chalk brood. Dump it out, and you still have your other hives that you can rebuild with.
Yeah, that's actually what I did. The honey that I actually produced in some of my better hives, it went into my lesser hives just to get them ready for winter.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm feeding my hives the ones that need it. The ones that don't need it, they're fine, but I'm going to watch them pretty close for the next month and a half. Generally speaking, we have warm enough weather that we can feed them syrup probably into about mid-October. And then we usually are too cold. Once temperatures start to hit, only get up to about 55 during the day. Now syrup doesn't flow very well. The bees don't take it very well. And at that point where we're only getting up into the mid 50s during the day, now if you've got to feed them, now you've got to switch to either a sugar board or fondant to feed them. They won't take the syrup. And we really don't want to give them syrup too late in the year because that's extra moisture in the hive. Again, we don't want to create too much moisture in that hive. But your bees right now are going through what I call that fall turnover. They're starting into raising all that winter brood. And to me, this is kind of a critical time for the hive to get that whole brood nest turned over. Every bee that's in there right now in a month and a half is going to be dead, and they've got to replace all those bees. All that population's got to get replaced with winter bees, and that seems like something hard to do, especially if you've had a hive and it's done really well and you've been stacking honey boxes on it, and now you've pulled the honey boxes off and it seems like there's too many bees to fit in the hive. And that happens, but that population's gonna shrink way back in the next month and a half. It's naturally gonna shrink back. But what's left has got to be healthy winter bees. And the only way to get those healthy winter bees is to make sure your mites are under control now. So if you haven't done mite treatments, you got to get them on. Don't wait. You got to get them on now. I'm right in the middle of my mite treatments. And I wish I was 2 weeks ahead. I wish my mite treatments were just about done, not in the middle of them.
Yeah, I'm on the second round on a couple of these hives that the mite treatment didn't work on.
You'd mentioned you did Apivar and then did mite checks afterwards, and you didn't like
Yeah.
it. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I treated with Apivar and I went the full 42 days. I had one hive that had 10 or 12 mites in the count, and then another hive that had 4 or 5. And I got back in to do my counts after the 42 days, and I hadn't even put a dent in any of those mites. It actually got worse in the one hive.
Really?
So I was not happy with it at all. But I went to my other bee yard, and I got better results out of it. It actually took care of the mites. So I don't know if I had a bad package or what was going on, but so now I got Formic Pro on the bad one, and I'm trying some Apigard on another one.
I've got Apigard on my hives right now.
Yeah.
I like Formic Pro this time of year if we can get some cool weather. Kirk he caught the window. I was wishing I had time because I kind of saw that window of 3 or 4 days where the temperatures were going to be low enough for Formic, but I wasn't in a position to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I'm on day 2 with my Formic. I'm watching the temperatures like a hawk.
Yeah, day 2, and tomorrow's going to be. Well, if you can get to day 4 without blasting them out of the hive, the queen will shut down. She probably shut down laying, but she should start right back up again. Usually it's those first 3 or 4 days with Formic that are the hardest. You get past that and then you're fine.
Yeah, this hive, it was somewhere around 15 mites, and I knew I had to get something strong on it right away. So I went with the Formic on it, whether it kills them or not, the mites were going to anyways.
Yeah, when I did my counts, I was getting 6 and 8 and 9, and then I hit one that had 20 on it, and I'm like, oh. Which is, last year at this time, I was doing mite checks and I wasn't seeing hardly anything. I mean, I was getting zeros and ones.
Yep.
And I decided what I did different this year was I did not put in an oxalic acid sponge. I did last year. So I soaked some sponges in oxalic acid and vegetable glycerin. And I threw those on my hives about end of May sometime last year. And I had intended on doing that this year again. And life just got in the way and it didn't happen. And I thought, well, my mite counts coming out of spring were really good. I was seeing all zeros. And I thought, okay, they'll be okay. And I've done mite checks during the summer and I'm seeing a 1 here and a 2, 2 mites per 300 bees. That's less than 1%. So I thought, oh, I'm okay. And then I started checking 2 weeks ago. And yeah, now I'm in the 3 to 4 to 5% or 10% range.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh.
It's strange because last year I hardly even seen a mite in my counts. I don't know if it was the hard winter before with all the snow, but something was different last year. This year I've got mites.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And so I'm kind of scrambling, hoping that I get them treated quick enough so that they can raise those winter bees and I still have a good, healthy population going into winter. That's my fear right now, but I think we've got time. I think it's okay.
Yeah. Like I said, I don't know that I'm an Apivar fan anymore though.
Apivar, Amitraz is the active ingredients in Apivar, and the commercial guys have used it for years. But they have been doing testing around the country and up into Canada, and they are seeing pockets of resistance where it's just not working.
Yeah.
And as I sit and think about it, I'm pretty sure that Apivar is what yaks are using around here. So
yeah,
I would be interested to ask one of them, what are they seeing with Apivar this year? Is it working? Is it, or are they seeing resistance? If I run into one of those to Robert or somebody else, I'll ask him.
Yeah, it'd be interesting.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what they're seeing in their hives for mites. And if they're using something else, maybe they've seen the resistance and they've had to switch to something else.
Yeah, it was strange because I have these hives here in Bluebell, and Yaks is close here. Didn't even touch them here, and then I got some hives in Mountain Home, and it worked there. So not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never used Apivar. I've only used Formake, Apiguard, and oxalic acid. That's all I've ever used.
Does Apiguard have the chance of getting resistance?
From what I understand, they don't think so. But most of the scientists will say never.
Yeah.
So I don't think so, but maybe. From what I understand from some of the scientists that I've listened to, they don't think the chance of either formic or oxalic is, they say there's very little chance that they would build resistance to that. And now thiamol, which is what Apigard is, they say the same thing, but I've noticed they've kind of hedged just a little bit on that one, that there might be something else going on there that maybe. So far, when I've used Apigard, I quite like it. It seems to clear up. It takes care of the mites usually, but sometimes if I see things in the hive that aren't quite like what I'd like, maybe I'm seeing some brood that's maybe a little off colored. By the time I get through an Apigard treatment, that seems to clear up a little bit. I don't have any evidence of that. This is just a gut feeling that I'm seeing. So I generally like the way my hives look after they've gone through an Apigard treatment. But I feel the same way with formic. When they get through a good formic treatment, man, the brood nest looks great.
Are you buying the Apigard in the bucket, or are you just doing the individual packages?
I buy it in the bucket.
Yeah.
It lets me, like, since it was still hot last week when I was putting Apigard in, I only did half a dose of Apigard because it's got a temperature window too.
Right.
So I only did a half a dose of Apigard. And I'm looking at the temperatures for next week, and it looks like they're going to be pretty, back down in the 70s. It looks like we're going to cool off. I'll probably do a full dose of Apigard next week. And, or this week, sorry. Thursday's supposed to be 77. I'll probably do a full dose of Apigard. Usually it's 50 grams of Apigard 2 weeks apart. And their instructions say if the temperatures are too high, you can do half a dose, so 25 grams, but do them a week apart instead of 2 weeks apart. So you're still putting the same amount in total on, you do them 25 grams every week for 4 weeks, or you do 50 grams twice. And I'm probably going to do 25 grams and then 50 grams. And then we'll see what they look like at that point if I need to hit them one more time.
Yeah, the hive that I put the Apigard on, I used the full treatment on that, and it did look like it was pushing some bees out onto the front of the hive.
Yeah, I was out by my hives a couple of days ago, and they were bearding out the front.
Yeah.
And you just walk by the hive and you can smell that Apigard.
Yeah.
It's strong enough. You don't even have to open the lid, and it's there.
Do you just put it under the top cover?
I like to, when you buy it in the bucket, they give you a little 3x5 card.
Yep.
And I like to, because I run the 3 mediums, I like to put it between the second and third box.
Okay.
Which for me is going to be right above the brood nest.
Yep.
Because the third medium's all honey, and the first and second boxes are where my brood nest is at. So I usually just crack the top one, slide it in and close and set it back down and go to the next one. I just slide it in, and it gets mashed on the frames. And to me, that's okay. You want the bees walking through that Apigard and spreading it around. If I get back into the hive and it's in a few days, that Apigard crystallizes as the moisture comes out of that gel. And if I still see a big clump of those crystals on the card, I know that hive didn't try to clean it out. If the card's pretty well clean, then I know that hive's been hygienic enough to try to clean that out of the hive. And that means they're tracking it all over the hive, which is exactly what you want. You want them spreading it around. I like it. For me, the Formic Pro is easier to do. Cause you just crack the hive, throw the couple of pads in, close the lid. And if you can do the full dose, you only have to do it once.
Yeah, 14 days,
Yeah,
you're done.
and you're done. And I'm half tempted to, because the temperatures are going to back off. It looks like in 2 weeks, I'm half tempted to switch and use Formic because I know it's going to kill all the mites in 2 weeks. But I don't know whether I'm going to do that or not.
I have a bunch of, I wouldn't say a bunch of Formic, but probably enough to treat. I don't know how many hives, I'd have to look, but it's like a month expired. If anybody can make any use out of that, it's going to go to waste if nobody can use it.
And I've got some that's expired. I think a month. I wouldn't worry about a month expired. If it was last year's expiration, then maybe. But
Yeah.
I wouldn't worry about a month being expired at all. Those come in foil packets. I don't see. I guess chemically there's probably some degradation, but I just don't see them losing their efficacy all that quickly. But I'm not a chemist, so I don't know. Maybe those guys know something I don't.
I kind of read up on it, and that they do come in the foil package, but then when you open it up, it's got paper surrounding it. And they say that paper will deteriorate, and then your exposure is higher at that point.
Oh, and then it off gases too quickly.
Yes.
Which in cooler temperatures wouldn't happen as quickly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a month after expiration, I wouldn't worry about it. It wouldn't bother me a bit. I'd use it.
Yeah, and I did.
I have plenty. In fact, I'm probably in the same boat. I'm probably going to have some that's going to expire before I can use it.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the way, I bought a box of Formic, and then it got stashed and got pushed behind something, and I didn't think I had any. And so 6 months later, I bought another box, and then a few months later, I found them both, and I'm like, oh, I've got more Formic than I can use. Well, Rachel said in the chat that Lorraine had a question. She says she processed her honey and it's in 5-gallon buckets. Now she has time to get it bottled, but it's crystallized in the buckets. What does she do? You got to get it uncrystallized. If it was warm enough outside, you could probably set it outside to warm enough. It'd warm up enough that you could probably get it soft enough to get it out of the bucket. They make blankets specifically for wrapping around a bucket for warming honey, but they're a little bit pricey to do that. Basically, you just wrap it around the bucket, plug it in, let the bucket sit. It warms the honey to about it might get up to 105, maybe 110 at the most, which is okay. You've not damaged the honey at that point. Most of the time when I've checked the temperature on it, it's usually right around 100. I have a couple of those blankets that I use to decrystallize my honey, because I make enough honey and I have to store it. It gets stored in buckets, and then it crystallizes, and I have to decrystallize it. So I have a couple of those blankets that I use. You just wrap it around the bucket, plug it in. Takes about 3 days to warm it enough to decrystallize it. And you have to, about day 2, you have to start stirring it a little bit so you get what's on the bottom stirred up and get it to fully decrystallize. That's one way. I've heard of people taking a heating blanket or a heating pad and basically doing the same thing, wrap that bucket up in a heating blanket or a heating pad. But it takes a day or two for that to work. If you can get it warm enough that you can kind of soften up the honey and scoop it out and then transfer the honey into containers that you could warm over a double boiler, you could do that. If you're going to go straight into quart bottles and then the bottles are going to go back into, back into your food storage, I wouldn't worry about getting it completely decrystallized. I would just get it soft enough that I could get it into the bottles and then, put the lid on the jar and store it away. It's just going to crystallize right back again anyway. And then, quart bottles work really well because you can take the quart bottle and set it in a pan of warm water to decrystallize just a quart at a time. Does that help, Rachel? She's not answering. Anybody have any other ideas?
You can just scoop it out of there if you got a good stiff spoon and put it in a container and then put it in water and warm it up.
Yeah.
We've done that before.
Leave it in the 5-gallon bucket and just use an ice cream scoop and scoop what you need. And usually my honey, though, when it crystallizes and, come January, it's pretty hard. But I have one of these, let's see if I can find it, a bee blanket. I share the screen. There you go. It's just a heating blanket, wraps around the bucket, and you plug it in. They're a little bit pricey, but they do work.
Hey, Glade, I was watching a thing on YouTube. It's been a couple years ago, and somebody took one of those little small freezers, and they had put a little thermostatically controlled little just an electric heater in there, and they set it 4 days, but they just kept the temperature down and just there it was insulated. They to thaw their 5-gallon.
I've almost done that because when honey crystallizes in those honey bears, they're a pain to get decrystallized without ruining the bear. So yeah, people have taken an old fridge or an old freezer or even just made a box and insulated the box, and then they'll put some sort of heat source in it that's tied to a thermostat. So you don't overheat your honey. You don't want to overheat it. You don't want to get it above about 110, in my opinion. Some will say a little less, and some will say 125 is fine. At 110, honey flows pretty good. It almost flows like water. I've kind of been keeping my eye open for a small upright freezer that's not working. The compressor's gone out on it. Because all you want is the box, the insulated box. That's really what they were looking for. And then they'll usually put some sort of heat source, which is most of the time just a light bulb, which incandescent bulbs are getting hard to find. But they'll put some sort of heat source in the bottom and a thermostat on there to turn that heat source on and off. And a lot of them will put in a fan just to circulate the air inside of it. And they'll set the temperature to about 105, 110, somewhere in that range. Stack all their honey bottles, their bears, their bucket in, shut the door, and let it set for a day or two. and it will decrystallize the honey. If somebody came up with the right upright freezer that wasn't working, that didn't look like it had been through the war, I would be tempted to do that, because I go through enough honey that, sometimes I have it crystallized in the bottle, and the bottle's fine. It's okay. The honey's not hurt, but us Americans, for some reason, we do not want crystallized honey at all. And it does not sell.
Last year at the farmer's market, there was a lady there that she was selling crystallized honey. You saw her there probably, and nobody would buy it.
Yep.
It's just, not that they couldn't take care of it. It's labeled organic and all of that stuff,
But
yeah.
they don't want it.
Crystal.
Yeah.
Right. Yep, you're right.
As soon as it's crystallized, they don't want it. But now if you cream it and make creamed honey, which is just crystallized honey, that works. But creamed honey is nice.
They
and
don't know
smooth
that's
on
what
your
it
tongue.
is.
Yeah. There's a process for creamed honey. What can you make out of, Rachel's asking, what can you make out of crystallized honey? Make your bread. A lot of people use honey in their bread as their sweetener, and just scoop it up, put in your bread dough. Any cooking, you can put crystallized honey in it. It's just going to melt. Creamed honey is just crystallized honey. The only difference is the crystals are small and smooth instead of being big and chunky and gritty.
Just controlled.
Size of the crystals. That's the only difference between honey that you just set on the shelf and it crystallizes and it gets chunky and gritty and nobody wants to eat it. But if you can keep the crystals small and smooth, then the honey gets more of a peanut butter consistency to it, more of a caramely consistency. And now it's really good. And some people like it better than regular honey, which is funny because if you decrystallize creamed honey, you're back to runny honey, regular honey.
I made some the first years here. I had honey. I messed with it for a while. Yeah, it's kind of fun to mess with, and it works good. But since then I haven't done any more with it. I just can't do it.
Yeah, I do it and I sell it, and it sells well. But I've noticed when I make it, it makes a difference if my honey is dark that I use to make the creamed honey with. Then the creamed honey comes out more of a butterscotch color, and it's not as pretty and it doesn't sell as well. If I can get that light creamed honey,
darker seems to go hard too when it's. When you creamed it, seemed to be just a little stiffer.
You're breaking up, Kirk.
Oh, I say when you cream the darker honey, did it seem to be a little bit stiffer consistency than the lighter stuff seemed to be little?
Yeah, now that you say that, probably so.
That's what it seemed like to me.
I hadn't really thought about it that way. The darker honey tastes fine, crystallized. It tastes fine. It's just not as pretty.
Yeah.
If I can catch that spring honey that's really light and then use it to make creamed honey with, now it's a real pretty color, and I like it better. So this darker honey that I usually get later in the summer, I don't like making creamed honey out of it very well, just because of the color. The flavor is great, but the color's.
We're used to seeing really white creamed honey.
Yeah. And this isn't white, it's almost butterscotch color. All right, everybody. It's almost 8 o'clock. Thanks for
your time, Glade. We appreciate all you do for us.
Thanks for joining. Anybody else have any questions? Before we go, give you last chance. All right, get your bees treated. Make sure they're heavy. And then cross your fingers for winter.
Amen.
Thanks, Glade.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.